to share on social media if you so choose. We are, there was one other housekeeping thing I was going to, oh, and just a reminder to mute yourselves. We can mute the whole group, but if you do remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking or sharing anything, that will be really helpful. We're expecting quite a large crowd that may come and go throughout the meeting. So if you can remember to do that, it will be very helpful. And on behalf of Carol and I want to welcome everybody and thank you all so much for joining. Not exactly as we had, we had hoped to maybe meet in person, but we'd actually been talking about webinars for the mid-year meeting for quite a while. It makes it easier for everyone to participate and to listen in. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jean Rustman. I'm the administrator of the Office of Passenger Transportation at the Michigan Department of Transportation. And I am co-chair of this committee, and I will let Carol introduce herself.
All righty, let me, now that I stopped sharing, see if my camera's there. So welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining the meeting. We've got, I think, some really great presentations and discussion coming up. And we really appreciate everybody taking time out of their day. Everybody's dealing with the new reality of wherever you're working from, whether it's an office with a more limited number of people or you're working from home. It's really great to see everybody joining, and we should have some good discussion. So I just typed in the chat pod before. If everybody can kind of type their name and the company name in the chat pod, everybody at least will know who's on the call. And the other thing is, later on down the road, we'll be probably taking minutes of our meeting. And so we'll include with that a list of everybody who was on the webinar today. So Jean, I'll just share my screen very quickly again, just so I can introduce the agenda just for folks that may not. Hopefully you can see that now.
Yep,
so very briefly, we're just going through some housekeeping things and welcome, obviously. We're going to get into our presentations in a little bit. So we have 3 presentations in the first session. We'll take a break. And actually that reminds me, obviously, if you need to take a break, by all means do. We're going to be probably reminding people throughout the meeting, just if you're not presenting or you don't have anything to offer, if you just keep yourself on mute, that would be great. Then after our little break, we're going to have another session where we're talking a little more about data and managing that during a crisis, since we're still in the midst of a crisis here. Then we're going to move to a discussion about research topics. And we're also going to introduce some basic ideas about how you, as if you are a member of the committee, even if you're a friend of the committee, we've got some basic guidelines that we want people to follow to be able to participate in what the committee does. So I'll briefly mention that before Michael, either Jean or I will mention it before Michael. And then we'll talk a little bit about research topics. we're going to turn it over to Adam and David to talk about the paper review process. And we'll go through some basic committee, business, a little bit about our new subcommittees, a little bit about the committees that no longer exist. And the only other thing that I will mention up front, if you can have everybody mute themselves, that would be great. So the only other thing that we're getting echo, so if people can mute themselves, I think that'll help a lot. So the only other thing that I will mention before we get started is I'm imagining that a good number of you received an email from TRB yesterday or today with the very big announcement that the TRB 2021 annual meeting is going to be held virtually. They have not worked out all the details of that, but they made that decision based on several different factors. They did a survey, and about 85% of the people that answered the survey said that they would feel more comfortable because of the pandemic and travel restrictions between countries, that they would feel more comfortable. So TRB is in the process of trying to determine exactly how they're going to move forward with the virtual meeting. It's probably going to span a longer time than just a week, but at this point, we don't have any other details. But I just wanted to sort of start by mentioning that. Jean, did you want to mention anything else before we get into the meeting itself? Jean, you might be muted.
Darn it. I try to avoid doing that and being that, silent face on the screen. But so if you want to ask questions or have comments during the presentations, we ask that you put your question in the chat field, but then you can also raise your hand. And those of you not familiar with Microsoft Teams, down where you have your microphone and everything else, the buttons, there's a hand that you can raise. So you have to raise your hand to ask a question, and then when you're done, you actually have to click that again and lower your hand. So just a little housekeeping note there. And Carol, I was busy doing other things, so you may have mentioned this, but we do have some polling questions that we're going to be asking. I don't know if Carol mentioned that, but they'll pop up on the screen, and you'll get a link, and you'll be able to respond to those polling questions, and then we'll be able to share the results with you live. So that'll be later on down in Michael and Adam and David's portions of it. Then we have some questions that we wanted to pose to you. So we're trying all kinds of new things. So hopefully it all works. We thank you all for sticking in there with us as we try this all out. And I think that's all I had.
All right, I guess we can get started with our first session 2 minutes early.
Woohoo!
Yeah, we may not go through the rest of the meeting now, well, but so just for everyone, we're going to do the presenters are going to do 10 to 15 minutes of a presentation. As Jean said, please feel free to ask questions in the chat pod, and we'll get to those. And so I guess we can get started with our first session, and first up is Chris, right?
Yes. So Chris Musielak from Moovit, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and try and share your screen. We did a dry run yesterday at work, so hopefully it works for you today.
Let's try it again. All right, let's confirm that you can see my screen here.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Well, Carol and Jean, thank you very much. Very, very excited to be a part of this session. Again, my name is Chris Musielak, based in Chicago. So I represent Moovit on the business development side of the house. So working with industry, transit agencies, state DOTs, private organizations, so on and so forth. So during this session, we'll be just taking you through very, very high level introduction to Moovit for those who aren't familiar, and then walking you through some of the things we're working on with our partners in the space and ways that we're seeing that we can collaborate and help people through these times. So for those who aren't familiar with Moovit, we just recently were acquired by Intel actually in May, so we're now an Intel company. To give you a little idea of our background, we're actually going back in 2011 with the goal of simplifying urban mobility. So our CEO had a couple of successful startups in the past, and really being based in Israel, had to do a lot of travel and got quite frustrated with getting around some of these major urban areas. So at that time, back in 2011, GTFS was still relatively young, and it was only used by about 50% of agencies. And I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
If everyone, please make sure you're muted. I'm going through the list and muting you if you're not.
So yeah, really, so when we launched, really the goal was just to integrate fixed route public transit information in walking directions. So when we did that in 3 cities to get started, the goal was 100,000 users after a year. And after the first year, when we got to 1 million users, it wasn't, is this a good idea? It's, well, how do we get this in as many cities as possible? And today we're widely recognized as the world's #1 urban mobility application. So just to take you through again, just a little bit about the consumer side of the business. Currently, we're at about, I'm going to fast forward about 8 years here, by the way. So we're at about 800 million users worldwide, and we're collecting about 6 billion anonymous data points a day. What that means is we can really help organizations with this really innovative data source and helping them be able to make data-driven decisions on the different mobility modes that they look to offer in their region. Today we're in about 3,200 cities, and I believe it's 104 countries now. It's a very accessible application and is used and can be utilized in 45 native languages. As you can see, just a vast amount of transit information, as you can see on the bottom. It's because of the approach that we took, which was very similar to Wikipedia. So actually what we did was, and I'll talk about the editor shortly, we took an approach of making it so that the community can go ahead and add entire transit systems and map them. So that's how we're able to get so much data within the system, is actually through crowdsourcing efforts that we make. And then lastly, I mean, again, one of the main reasons we're talking about this right now is how quickly mobility is changing, right? So again, we knew we needed to create a very flexible integration framework to be able to integrate all these different modes, again, as transit continues to reinvent itself. We're widely looked at as a leader in accessible mobility and partner with some of the leading special interest organizations, from G3ICT to ONSE to Be My Eyes. So everything we do in our technology is very much from the ground up to make sure that all users are able to leverage our technology for their use cases. Again, our market really is vast. So we work with transit agencies and operators, cities and municipalities, university campuses, and the private sector in a variety of different ways. So when you look at the mobility as a service platform that Moovit partners with organizations on, it really starts in the center here, which is what Moovit considers their brain. So this is like the engine. So it's our multimodal trip planning capabilities. It's the accurate transit data repository, along with the people movement data that we're collecting for analytics purposes. We're only going to be talking about a few things, a few of these items today, I should say, as they're the ones most relevant to the COVID response that we've taken with our agencies. One of them is going to be the Transit Data Manager to help agencies effectively manage their fixed route transit data, and then be able to communicate those changes to their ridership as well. We also do a lot around fares management and user management. We provide, outside of our consumer application, we provide white label or branded applications for agencies. Again, we do a lot in the payment and ticketing arena, more on the integration layer end than actually providing the services ourselves. We integrate and provide our own microtransit technology, as well as we improve real-time information to make the user experience as ideal as possible. And then another component we'll be discussing in depth today is going to be the analytics. Then lastly, the transit data APIs, which we work with and feed partners such as Uber, Lyft, Microsoft, and many of the other larger mapping and transportation companies in the world. Essentially help them provide public transit information to their users. So a lot of the information, that we're seeing here is going to be very evident, to everyone that's on the line right now. I mean, as we all know, transit and transportation systems is the backbone of our local and national economies. We're seeing how greatly, COVID and the pandemic here has affected us. So on the right here, you're just going to see some data from Moovit users. We have this data that's available on our website that you can feel free to check out, and it's updated on a daily basis. But also, a lot of this information is widely being shared by transit agencies themselves, where, we're looking at about 40 to 90% of their ridership's been affected by this. Certainly highlighting how much, these public transportation systems remain a lifeline for these essential workers. And certainly one thing that's been highlighted is with some of the legacy systems that some of these transit agencies have, it can be very difficult to adapt very quickly. So again, a lot of organizations are turning to us to see, well, what are ways we can innovate and offer more innovative services, and also make people aware, of these new services that are being offered. So some of the challenges, again, that organizations are coming to us to is, hey, how can we quickly adapt our services and schedules based upon the safety and demand? How do we then communicate that to our ridership, which is hugely important? And then one thing that's been quite interesting is agencies stopped, taking payment for their services. They kind of lost insights into their ridership and, how many people were taking their systems. So, we've been having some very interesting conversations around using, again, innovative data sources to have a good understanding of what their ridership looks like today. And then lastly, kind of how do we come out of this? So, obviously, we've kind of gone through the first wave here, and transit agencies have, made some very great changes, but how do we continue to adapt and provide flexible service as we continue to work through this and get back online? So these are the 4 sections that we'll cover. The ability to update schedules and routes efficiently, ability to communicate riders about changes, the ability to provide more flexible service models, and then lastly, using data to basically drive these decisions and promote resilience to the network. So when it comes to quickly modifying and communicating transit service updates, Moovit's been using this transit data manager tool for years. It's how we're able to actually manage, again, those 7,500 different transit agencies across the world and their data. We have an operations team that's able to easily be able to take in these network changes and be able to make sure that they're communicated out to the ridership. So the 2 things we'll talk about is the ability to use service alerts and short-term changes to be able to make sure the ridership is aware, as well as not being sent to incorrect locations where lines, let's say, aren't operating. So when it comes to managing and publishing service alerts, again, what we do is we have the ability to take in these feeds from, GTFS real-time feeds from social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth, and be able to take them in and communicate them out to ridership. So some examples, is like canceled lines, canceled stops, real-time delays or changes, so on and so forth. But what makes Moovit really interesting in what we're doing is we actually communicate that out, not just communicate that out to the riders, but what we also do is we then translate this information into trip plan information. So as you're seeing here, this is a trip, these are similar trip plans on the left. One is from Google, one is from Moovit. What you're seeing is it's showing that the bus information is on time here, and they're being sent to a stop that's actually closed. So what they're doing is they're communicating that the stop is closed, but the trip plan is still sending that rider to that location. Whereas on the right-hand side, Moovit's short-term change capabilities will actually make it so that that user is not going to that stop. So again, this is one of the many reasons why, again, partners such as Uber, Lyft, Microsoft, and many others have opted to use Moovit's APIs for public transit information versus some other data providers that are actually out there. Now, in terms of keeping riders informed with the latest updates, we talk about how we do some of that via the via the service alerts and integrating push notifications, but also there's other general types of information that are going to need to be communicated as well. So, targeted messaging regarding COVID, as you can see here, overcrowded information, which is something that's very interesting to organizations now. So we can take crowdsourced information regarding, crowded stations, and we're beginning to take information from the GTF SRT and making it such that we can understand the crowdedness of vehicles that are out there on the streets. Again, all for social distancing purposes and making sure that individuals are comfortable coming back to public transit. Now, in terms of pivoting to a more flexible service model. So again, a lot of organizations, they still have their vehicles that have been pulled off the street and are sitting idle. A lot of lines are continued to be closed, even though many of them are opening back up. So we started working with organizations around a way to utilize these vehicles in a more efficient and a more on-demand type manner. So essentially what we're doing here again is we're giving agencies the ability to use the existing fleet without any new vehicles or shuttles, adhering to local regulations. So again, across the world, we're seeing different requirements here. Some want to use flexible pickup points and not transit locations, or say regular transit stop locations for social distancing purposes. And another thing organizations are wanting to do is they're wanting to set maximum passengers per vehicle. So then this way they can go ahead and make sure that, hey, there's only X amount of passengers, and anybody else who goes to book a trip is not able to, take that next, vehicle that's coming through. So again, it's all about matching that and making sure you're adhering to those regulations. And obviously enabling the organization to be able to operate this remotely, given it's a software as a service solution. So again, you can go ahead and manage all of this remotely from the comfort of your own home as more and more organizations are staying and working remote. So again, just three main components of Moovit's transport on demand solution is the rider application that again integrates all of that communication, integrates all of that modes, and offers that on-demand service only if it's offered in that corridor. I mentioned the operations and control center for call intake and management of those vehicles, as well as the driver application. So right here is just one example of a case study during COVID, which is for Bank Hapolim in Israel. So what happened was Israel actually stopped their train service altogether at one point. Bank Hapolim had 4 separate locations in which they needed to get 6,500 bank employees to. So what they opted for was licensing Moovit's on-demand platform to be able to allow for just people who, just I should say staff members of Bank Hapolim to be able to travel safely to work in more of an on-demand fashion. So again, it gave them that flexibility, quick deployment, and also the comfort to make sure it was only their, their employees actually taking that particular service. The last thing I hit on is how organizations are leveraging analytics data to be able to, make decisions on their current network and future network. So we have a few planning tools we work with organizations on. One of them is on-demand or microtransit simulations, and the other is, our urban mobility analytics. So both of these are actually leveraging real app user data that we gather on an aggregated and anonymous basis. And essentially what we're doing is we're using that to help you make data-driven decisions. So the particular example here that I'll cover very quickly because I'm up against the clock is the Pittsburgh case study here that we did regarding the project was actually called Safe Shift. So what we're asked to do is study this particular corridor and understand how how individuals were traveling between the hours of 12 to 5. In this case study, what we expected to see was very, very heavy travel to, certain, I believe it was the Amazon fulfillment center, but we actually found out it was mainly hospitality workers as well as hospital workers. And you can see by those shaded areas, those were the main areas of, those were redundant trips, if you will. So what we did was we actually, broke this corridor down. We layered on the fixed route service, which you can see in red. Those are the red lines, as well as the green lines, which are the demand corridors. And what we found that only about, I think it was like 13% of the workers between 12 and 5 were taking public transit trips. And if there was more microtransit service available, that we could increase that ridership on public transit by about, 300 riders, a day. So again, just quickly here, how does it help you optimize? It lets you understand which lines to bring back based on demand, allows you to plan and optimize your fleet. So again, we can right size vehicles and right size the operations. And obviously, you know, assess the ability of the system to meet the needs of the community in our new reality. Obviously with an essential on focus on essential workers. So in conclusion, you know, what we found is that, you know, communicating accurate information is extremely important to the public. Considering converting some corridors into an on-demand model so to allow for flexibility and safety, as well as understanding the current mobility, taking a data-first approach.
Okay.
Thank you.